Hello and welcome to Food for You and the Planet, a fresh new podcast that explores healthy and environmentally sustainable food solutions. This podcast is brought to you by Healthy Plan Eat Online Farmers Market. I'm Dr. Rosemary Ostfeld and I'm your host. Together, we'll hear from leaders in environmental science, agriculture, medicine, nutrition, entrepreneurship, and more. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to hear all the latest in healthy and sustainable food with Food for You and the Planet. Today's episode features Kestrel Burcham, Policy Director at the Cornucopia Institute. Kestrel has a background in animal science and English from the University of California, Davis. They have worked as an animal technician in both research and industry settings and have experience with different types of livestock. Organic and environmentally conscious food production is part of their background, having grown up on familial farms and assisted in all aspects of farm management. Kestrel holds a law degree with a certificate in environmental and natural resource law from Lewis and Clark Law School. Thank you so much for being here today, Kestrel.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. So we'll kick off with our first question. What is the Cornucopia Institute and what type of work does it do?
The Cornucopia Institute is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to uncover the truth behind organic food and advocate for an organic label that consumers can trust. Our vision is to help the world and build agriculture that heals people and the planet. And in general, our main focus is educating people about the organic label and organic food, advocating for organic integrity, and being an organic marketplace watchdog.
Awesome. Why is it important for people to support food producers who follow organic practices and are USDA Certified Organic?
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons that I would put at the top there for supporting organic farmers. It's really important to support the producers who are certified organic, especially the smaller and mid-sized brands, because organic practices represent a commitment to certain ideals and certain rules that are more labor intensive and more difficult for farmers typically. This commitment does improve some human health outcomes and also has significant environmental benefits, but unfortunately that does come at a higher cost. And so it's very important for consumers to support that. Often organic food is a little bit more expensive, of course, and that expense is because the practices are more expensive, and there's also other reasons because our federal government doesn't tend to support these environmentally friendly practices with subsidies and other programs. So what you're actually seeing in the grocery store is more like the real cost of food, the real cost of doing business. And a lot of these farmers without consumer support would go out of business. So it's kind of support what you want to see in the world kind of issue. And there are a lot of farmers who will say they have organic practices. And I guess I would say that while some of them may have really high levels of practice, if a consumer does not know their farmer personally and know exactly what they're looking for, being certified is important because then there's all this foundational rules that are being checked by a third party. And you kind of know the baseline of what you're getting if you do not know your farmer. So that's why the certification in particular is important. It's for those times when you don't have access to the kind of food where you can go shake your farmer's hand and walk their farm, especially. Although there's a lot of certified organic farmers where you can do that as well. And then it's just kind of that extra level of dedication because they have to go through a paperwork process and a inspection process and all of that. So it's kind of an extra check and protection for consumers to know what they're getting when they're eating.
Thank you. That absolutely is important. So why is it critical to uphold the integrity of the organic industry and organic standards?
Yeah, kind of playing off what I had just said, there are these regulatory standards that are in the federal government administered by a branch of the USDA called the National Organic Program. And that National Organic Program administers the regulations, which there are regulations through the federal regulatory system. And like many marketplaces, especially ones where they're kind of based in the integrity of the product, if that integrity is not upheld, it ruins the marketplace. So if people don't trust the organic label, essentially, they are not going to buy organic food. And that has an impact on those really high ethical welfare organic farmers. Another thing we really think is important for integrity is transparency in our food system in general, but in their organic marketplace as well. Without integrity, without transparency, safe food, like knowing where your food comes from, becomes almost impossible. Like people would have to grow all their own food, and for a lot of people that just isn't accessible for whatever reason. While no ag system is perfect, the organic program is often the best of what we have in the US, at least, to get safe, more environmentally friendly food for their families. So maintain that integrity supports that access, that food access, and supports ethical farmers as well.
That's such an important thing to think about, is increasing access. What are some of the organic agriculture issues the Cornucopia Institute has helped address, and how has it addressed them?
Yeah, so the Cornucopia Institute has a long history of being an organic watchdog and educator, as I mentioned. And the watchdog piece, we look out for problems in the organic industry and work to solve them through policy work, through regulatory advocacy, through consumer advocacy. We have lots of different ways we tackle things. Some of the things we've worked hard on over the years are getting improvements to the regulations over time. We're very much advocates for continuous improvement within agriculture in general and organic specifically. Some things that are really specific I can cite were improving the rules for grazing of ruminant livestock. So that's our cattle, our sheep. Those are ruminant livestock. Rules for how outdoor access works for all livestock, how it's defined, how animals can be transitioned from conventional production to organic is important. We've also done a lot of advocacy around additives that are allowed in organic or not allowed in organic, and tend to have our hands in like all of that work, because there's a process to getting certain substances allowed in organic production. We are very involved in that. And we also do a lot of just animal welfare advocacy work, improving those rules, improving enforcement, educating consumers. We also do a lot of like action alert type work to get consumers more involved in the regulatory process and more involved in like having an influence in the food system, which I think a lot of consumers really crave right now, is having, not being out of touch with their food.
So if someone wanted to get involved with that, how would they do that? Is there a link on your website where people can sign up for those action alerts?
Yeah, so the best way is to go to our website, www.cornucopia.org. And we have a couple ways. We do post action alerts on that website, but you can also sign up for our e-news, which is our free newsletter that alerts people when there is an action. And you can do that on our website pretty easily. And that's probably the best way. You just get an email when there's something, and if you're interested in whatever that topic is, we give you instructions on how to do whatever is needed to help with that action, either contact your representatives or comment on regulations or whatever it may be.
Thank you. That's really great, because I think sometimes people underestimate the power of their voice. So it's great to have the Cornucopia Institute guide people in some actions that they can take to get involved and take a stance on some of these really important issues.
Yeah, and I would like to add that even just like your buying power, what you buy for your family is, an act in and of itself, honestly. So, if that's all folks can do, um, that's still quite powerful.
So in the past, there have been some times when large corporations may have been in violation of organic standards. What do some of those violations sometimes look like, and how has the Cornucopia Institute done to try to stop those violations?
Yeah, so part of our watchdog work, we're always taking in whistleblower complaints or looking for issues. Um, a couple times, or one of the things we have seen happen a couple times is violations or alleged violations, because again, it's something that needs to be investigated by the USDA, not us, a private party, although we do investigate and share all of our findings with the USDA. We found alleged violations of businesses skirting the rules or breaking the rules surrounding how much animals need to be grazed, outdoor access. There has been sometimes we've worked in conjunction with animal welfare organizations who have found, have had undercover folks find animal welfare issues. Um, and by and large, these brands have been in the area of organic dairy, but we've also seen some in the area of organic eggs, as well. And usually what that involves is we do an investigation, which includes talking to whistleblowers, talking to um, businesses who have relationships with them. All of that information gets put into a formal legal complaint that goes to the USDA, and then we work with the USDA for them to investigate, because they're the ones that hold the power to do a non-compliance or a violation. Um, and that has been sort of an ongoing thing we do, watchdogging these large businesses that typically sell to store brands. Um, so when you see like a Walmart branded organic milk or Walmart branded egg or Safeway or whatever it may be, Kroger, these large brands usually produce milk or eggs or whatever it may be for those store brands.
Thank you. That's a really, yeah, good to understand how everything kind of works in the system. What happens when large corporations violate the organic standards? Like, what are the consequences?
Yeah, so this is one area we're working to improve, since the organic standards were enacted, decades ago. Um, but basically, the process is, um, if they're found to be in violation by the National Organic Program, they're issued a non-compliance, and usually they can sometimes correct it then, and they'll be checked up more frequently to make sure they correct it. It depends on what the violation is, though. So it's kind of like if it's really egregious, really like intentionally fraudulent or intentionally um, really bad, often that their certification will be pulled. So they won't be allowed to sell their food as organic, um, and they'll probably get some hefty fines for doing so. Um, if it's less egregious, if it's more something that can be fixed, the National Organic Program will work with them to fix it. And again, if it's a serious violation, they are then like checked up on more often after that. Um, businesses, farms, handling operations are certified, are checked yearly. So the normal process is a yearly review, inspection, and all of that. But if someone has been in violation and they are trying to maintain their certificate, usually they get checked more often than a year. So that's kind of how it works. There are surprise inspections too that are kind of based on the risk of the business. So certain things up the risk according to the National Organic Program. Size is one of them. So if they're moving a lot of product or growing a lot of product, that is a risk factor. And previous violations are also a risk factor. So that's kind of how it works. It's a lot of like one downside of being certified organic, being under the federal system, is there's a lot of that government bureaucracy, and that's kind of why organizations like us, we play a role in speeding that up and kind of prompting it a little bit better, um, to make sure that things are kept on top of, and to also assist in information collecting, because the government just sometimes is underfunded. The organic marketplace is sometimes underfunded. So I will say though that the National Organic Program has been getting more money in recent years, and that has improved the speed. So yeah, that's kind of a little snapshot of how it works in the background. It's a lot of um, pulling them out of the organic system altogether, fines, which can get pretty hefty depending on what the violation is, and just more checks and balances, basically.
Thank you. It's really helpful to understand the process and some of the consequences that could happen if a big corporation were to violate the organic standards. In addition to being a watchdog, I'm interested in hearing more about the type of research the Cornucopia Institute completes and some of the findings.
Yeah, we do a lot of research, and I do head up our research. We do research into topics like carrageenan. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's an emulsifier additive that has been linked to some human health concerns. And there's been debate whether it should be pulled from being allowed in organic. Um, but we've done a lot of research into dairy, the benefits of organic dairy, the benefits of grass-based production, both benefits in terms of human health and environmental issues. We do a lot of research into environmental impact and climate change issues concerning how agriculture impacts these things, from like very micro to macro issues. So obviously climate change is a very macro issue, but we also look at research to do with microclimates and ecosystem services. So like concerns of local flooding and drought and things like that. And also environmental impact from pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, and the benefits of organic agriculture in terms of that. And then we also do a lot of brand research for specific commodities for our scorecards, where we rate organic brands. So we do brand research, both in terms of what a brand is doing, what their practices are, and what benefits or problems they may have, and also whether they're independent or not as a brand, with a really high emphasis on like transparency being very important, because I think consumers are generally, once they know what they're looking for, they know, and just finding that information is sometimes such a headache. We do a lot of that research for consumers so they don't have to.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the different types of scorecards the Cornucopia Institute creates and the types of methods that you use to create them.
Yeah, sure. So we have like our big scorecards are livestock commodities. So we have an egg scorecard, a poultry scorecard, which is for like um, turkey and chicken meat, organic dairy scorecard, organic beef scorecard, and then we have a bunch of other guides that are on a number of different topics, including snack bars, like the Cliff bars and granola bar type things, um, and soy products, including uh, non-dairy beverages that include like oat and other things as well. So we have some more vegan pointed scorecards. Yeah, but those are our main ones, and we've got a lot of different guides and things as well. But the eggs, poultry, dairy, beef are our big ones that require the most input and updates.
That's great. How does the Cornucopia Institute decide which producers are part of the scorecards?
Yeah, so for those commodity scorecards, we basically try and rate every organic brand that's available at retail. And so we do a lot of work trying to figure out who all those brands are, and we often ask consumers for help to let us know what their favorite organic brand are, so we don't miss any. Um, and we essentially send the brands a survey to fill out, which is based on whatever commodity it is. They're different for, eggs, poultry, dairy, whatever it is. And then after we get those surveys in or not, because a lot of brands do not want to tell us information because they're not being transparent, we do independent brand research. So we go in and find as much information we can about the brand's practices, just based on our own research, and put that into the scorecard. So there's like a multi-step process. It's survey, talking to the brand. If we do have a relationship with the brand where they will talk to us, we get pictures. We have an organic investigator who does farm visits as well. We stopped that for a while during the pandemic just to protect our staff, but we're back into it, where we're doing more farm visits. We'd like to have all of the mid-size brands visited at some point in person. But in the meantime, we get pictures, we get like video, there's that survey. We do our own research to confirm and make sure brands are being honest with us as well. So that's kind of how we build those out. And we're always looking for feedback on those scorecards from consumers. This year, we're going to be redoing our dairy scorecard. So there'll be emails going out soon asking for feedback on what consumers want to see as well. So
That sounds excellent. Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about some of the findings from the dairy and beef and egg scorecards? Like, what are some brands that people could potentially look out for when they're at the supermarket? Maybe we could go one by one. Maybe we could start with dairy.
yeah, so dairy, again, we're updating that this year, so it will be a little bit different by the end of the year. But there's a lot, so we rate on a scale of like 1 to 5, yeah, for all our scorecards. And the 5 rating usually is assigned to folks who are smaller farms, independent, very much like the farmer has control over the day-to-day interactions with the animals. Our four rated brands tend to land with mid-sized brands where the brand itself may not be the farmer, but they have close control, close relationship, and strict standards over what that production is still. And usually it's the 4 rated that most people will have available in the supermarkets. Usually the 5 rated are very small, very local, maybe only available in like 1 or 2 grocery stores because they're such small farms. So we usually recommend folks find 4 or 5 rated. Some of the common 4 rated dairy, for example, would be like Organic Valley Grass Milk, Maple Hill, brands like that, where they're larger, but they're not like factory farm, if that makes sense. Those are usually available nationally, whereas folks would have to, me telling you a highly rated dairy that's only available in like 1 county isn't super helpful. But you can go to our scorecards and look up where you live and see if there are any near you.
That's definitely helpful. Yeah, I definitely recognize some of those brand names. When you're looking at beef, like what are some of the things that you're taking into consideration with that type of scorecard? And are there any kind of all-star beef producers?
Yeah, so beef is an interesting one. The needs of each of these commodities are so different. So all our scorecards emphasize slightly different things. We found in our research that consumers were most concerned about environmental impact for beef, and also whether it was grass-based. So consumers seem really interested in like the 100% grass-fed aspects for both welfare and nutrition reasons. So our scorecard for beef emphasizes that. And there are a couple brands that are like in the 4 rated. area that I think there are Thousand Hills, and a couple others. I'd have to look to be 100% certain to reference the right ones, but again, it's all in our scorecard. And another thing, the environmental aspect of beef is always really interesting because there's a lot of concern about the impact cattle have on the environment. So our rating system takes that into account. So we give, a better score for people who are managing wildlife in a certain way, managing native species in a certain way, checking waterway health. All these things kind of go into that scoring as well. And of course, because our scorecards only rate organic food, there's no concern about pesticides or antibiotics in any of the brands on our scorecards. But that's something we also take into account in like the environmental impact, because that can have a huge environmental impact just downstream, like the production of antibiotics impacts human health because of antibiotic resistance issues and things like that. So that's something, even if it's not like impacting your steak that you're eating then, the benefits of not eating conventional are still being realized like in the world. If that makes sense.
Yeah, another food that people definitely probably eat a lot of are eggs. So what are some of the things that you are considering when you're looking at laying hens and your organic egg report and scorecard?
Yeah, eggs is another really complicated area. I don't know if your followers are aware, but the majority of eggs in the US are produced in battery cages and or in some other very confined, no outdoor access or no legitimate outdoor access. And organic is like this tiny little sliver of what eggs are produced in the US. Um, and even in the organic industry, the majority of eggs are produced in what I would call a factory farm, unfortunately. It's the one area that has had weaker regulations up until recently. We just succeeded in getting a new standards rule passed last year, and that will go into effect for laying hens in a couple years. So there's still some delay. That's going to change that radically. So that's some good news. But the bad news is that your organic eggs, if you're not being careful where you're getting them from, could be coming from a place where the outdoor access is what I like to call token. So they are required to have outdoor access, but whether the hens are utilizing it right now, the rules haven't been clear. So while that's going to improve, right now, people that want like truly pasture raised eggs need to be careful, because that word pasture raised can be used when it would not match what a consumer thinks of when they hear that word. There are certainly brands that are mid-size and available nationally that are actually getting their hens outdoors, that are organic. Some are like the natural grocers, store brands. They have a couple store brands that are through them, and then they have decent like mid-scale eggs. Vital Farms is another one, and although Vital Farms also has conventional lines, so you'd have to be careful to get their organic. If you want to make sure the hens are getting that organic feed. And so things are getting better in eggs, but that's like the one area where it's been rough, I guess I would say.
Yes. Are there any other scorecards that you'd like to share a little bit about that maybe there's something, interesting or exciting about them, or some of the brands that you have explored?
Yeah, I would say that I would say my favorite like non-livestock one is our plant-based beverage scorecard. It goes into some detail about like how complicated that industry is. It's just like it's exploding right now, quite frankly. And that scorecard and some of the materials around that scorecard talk about the environmental impact of all these different commodities. So like soya is very different from oats, is very different from almonds, is very different from, cashews, that are all so different in their environmental impact. And that scorecard also goes a little bit into additives. So a lot of these plant-based beverages, that's a tongue twister, have emulsifiers, gums, they have a lot of sugar sometimes. Um, there are more organic brands now, which is exciting. And I think it's important for consumers to support those organic brands too, because again, we have fewer pesticides into the environment and just less environmental burden overall because of the organic rules. So I think that one's really interesting and I would love to have it get more traction. Um, I'm allergic to dairy myself, so I use that scorecard myself. So that would be the one I would suggest people take a look at if they use any plant-based beverage products.
Absolutely. Plant-based beverages are definitely becoming more popular, so that one sounds like a really interesting one to check out. One thing that I understand can be challenging for small scale farmers that are interested in becoming certified organic is the cost associated with certified organic feed. Do you have any insights or ideas that you might be able to share on that issue and maybe how it could potentially be overcome?
Yeah, that issue is certainly one we hear about a lot, especially with poultry. A lot of the organic dairy and beef, we're seeing like that trend towards more grass-based, so that actually helps improve costs because um, grass is much cheaper than grain. Um, and for those animals that need that grain, it is a huge challenge. We've seen some farmers, if they have the resources, growing their own feed. Huge benefit to them. Very challenging to do because then you're not only an egg farmer or a chicken farmer, you're also a corn farmer, a soy farmer, a lentil farmer, or whatever it may be, right? So it really complicates things, and I just want to like note that some farmers are doing that, and I like want to give them like a gold star, because that's pretty incredible. And like and shortening those food chains as well. Otherwise, for the costs, I think it's something that consumers need to understand because it does increase the cost of the end product essentially. And that's why you often see things like organic eggs have that increased cost. It's because a lot of times that feed is more expensive. Um, and that just can't be helped. I would throw out there that the feed is more expensive, but the reality is that the conventional food, like the conventional eggs, the cost is not the true cost of production because conventional feed is getting massive subsidies from the US government that artificially decrease the cost. Um, we could argue all day about whether that's a good thing. I think the issue is in part that they're doing that for conventional, but very rarely for organic. Or so they're subsidizing crops that get a lot of synthetic fertilizers, a lot of pesticides, a lot of environmental burden. They're often monocropped. So that would be like one of the huge environmental impacts of eggs and chicken, turkey that is not often discussed is like that environmental impact of growing feed. Um, Another thing is these smaller farmers have more adaptability, and if you're truly giving the birds outdoor access, they often need less of the cereal feed. They still need some. I will say, like, one misconception I hear is that they can have none if they have really good outdoor access. That's not the case with these breeds that lay a lot of eggs and things. It's very difficult to maintain their caloric needs and get enough. Um, but that's something to look for is like the truly outdoor truly good outdoor access, they're eating insects, they're eating some vegetation, so it does lower that cost as well.
So if people are interested in supporting USDA certified organic, what are some actions that people can take to advocate for organic agriculture?
Yeah, again, I think the number one thing people can do is if you have local farms that are certified organic, support them directly. And if you don't, um, then support like the highest rated you can, basically. So like the level 4 is what we would call them in our scorecards. And even if you can't do that, even if you can't find that, even buying that store brand that is less high quality is still going to be better than the conventional. So it's kind of like do what you can when you can sort of idea. And if folks have more resources and you live in an area where there are a lot of small farms that maybe aren't certified organic, approaching them and saying, hey, I would support you and continue to buy your food, even if it's slightly more expensive if you went organic, is helpful. We've heard feedback from farmers that like was the final nudge that allowed them to transition and start these more beneficial practices because they had a really loyal consumer base who was supportive of them. And on top of that, just supporting brands with your food money, getting involved in the political process, advocating against anti-organic propaganda because there's a lot of it that basically says there is no benefit to organic food. That is absolutely not the case. There is a benefit um, in many ways, and becoming involved with the regulatory process. There's multiple ways to hook in if people are interested in that, and becoming involved in like your community food systems in any way. Supporting those farmers, but also supporting local regulation. We're a national organization, so we focus on the federal regulation primarily, but there's a lot of ways that small towns or cities even um, hook into this issue that consumers are really, their voice is very powerful, and can make a lot of difference if people are interested.
That's great. Yeah, there are many ways people can get involved, and it's good to always be reminded that there are little things that people can do. Are there any other things that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
The main thing is just to we'd love to have people follow us and give us feedback on our work and find ways to get involved. We're ramping up our educational work a lot. So if people just want to learn more about certain foods, farming practices, things like that, we're going to be doing more educational webinars and things like that, and are also looking for feedback and what people want to see, what people have questions about. We have like, for example, we had like a what are your questions about organic eggs webinar recently. That kind of thing is going to be happening more. Um, and yeah, just stay in touch.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining today, Kestrel. You did a fantastic job, and it's so wonderful to hear all the work that the Cornucopia Institute is doing to protect the integrity of USDA certified organic and show people all the really great brands that they can support. So thank you so much for your work.
Yeah, thank you for having me.